Zoom recording. There we go. Thank you. So I'll start over again. So we have our judge tonight, Nic Stover, who's from St. Louis Obispo in Southern California. Nic is a nature photographer. He does a lot of teaching classes, webinars, tutorials, and presentations with his goal to help us with our own creativity and artistic process. And I appreciate Nic joining us for this event. The information about Nic has been in at least the last 4 newsletters, and his website, www.stoverphoto.com, if you want to visit that. Nic did the judging for tonight, and we'll go through those images, and he'll give us his critiques as we show the images, and we'll see how the evening goes. If we all can mute. I will not be able to see the chat during this. It's just too difficult, and I'm going to screen share, and then we'll unmute at the end. Does that work for you, Nic?
Sure.
Okay. So my screen is up, and we're going to start with Class B nature to just mix it up. Let me minimize some things here.
All right.
Ready? Yes. So this is Class B nature.
Okay. So I like the focus on this particular image of obviously the feather, those would be called, there in the center. The elements I'm wanting to see a little bit more of in an image like this one, or I would possibly suggest, would be cropping in from the left-hand side. I don't know if it's the right cropping orientation to be kind of almost in a panoramic orientation. I almost want to see this in a square focused on the rocks and that area just around the feather itself. The other part and piece I would say is to look a little bit about possibly taking down my highlights around the feather itself so I could see those water droplets a little bit. It feels just a little bit bright there. And I'm thinking if you took your highlights down, you could possibly see some of that form just a little bit. And whether you want to do that through a local adjustment or something else would be one way to consider within that image.
So this was Water Weights by Kathy Patelis.
So a couple things on this image. One, I like some elements of the framing in terms of how it's within the scene. What I'm typically wanting to see, or I advise on waterfalls, is a slightly longer exposure, typically around 1/6 of a second, to get, and it's going to vary a little bit more of the actual feathers, a little bit more of the rivulets, and to kind of smooth it out a little bit within there. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing, when I look at the image, it does feel a little hot in terms of the brightness on the water, especially on the top portion where it's coming out. So once again, I would be looking at adjusting my highlights, possibly bringing down the exposure so I can see that detail. I want you to be able to see the individual water details within there. And then a couple other just minor things I probably would consider on an image like this one, the bottom portion where you kind of have the shrubbery coming in. I don't know if shrubbery is an official term. I probably would content aware fill that out so you have a more complete view of the water kind of down at the bottom. So if you're reshooting an image like this within the field, one of the things I would consider would be getting a little bit higher oftentimes. And sometimes we have that opportunity to get a little bit higher so we don't have things like the shrubs kind of interjecting into the image itself.
This is Big Flow by Jim Kessel.
All right. So without having the opportunity to have dialogues with the artists, there's obviously certain things we want to show in certain images and what we're trying to bring forth that maybe I don't understand. But I'll tell you straight across, this image is very blurry. It's out of focus. And so if that was the intention to be out of focus, I would push that effect almost a little bit further. And I would also consider, if that is not the intention, but you have a blurry image like this, what could you do to make it blurrier? And whether that's apply a Gaussian blur or do something else to make it almost feel artistic, because you have nice clouds within there and some interesting lines. But the image itself, when I look at it as being out of focus, was a little bit of a little off-putting.
So this is Delaware River by Alan Harris.
All right, this is one of my favorites. I really liked this image. I kept coming back to it time and time again for a wide variety of reasons. One is I love the tones within this image. It's a very calming type of image. Two, I like the particular emphasis and the element of where the focus is. So you have the focus really in a good spot within the image, but you still have some decent focus on the right-hand side for those little droplets within there. So we can actually still kind of look around and investigate within the image. So it was a good job in a lot of those contexts of the focus, a lot of the dots. I love the color as well. It's a very calming image to me.
This is Balancing Act by Mia Curran, and it was awarded first place.
So this image is interesting. I kept coming back to it a couple different times within there because we have a lot of interesting visual elements that are in play. First thing I would do with an image like this one is I would flip it. So the eye, the way we read images, and I'll talk about this in another image as well, is movement going from left to right will oftentimes flow within an image. And so you can just rotate the image within Lightroom or Photoshop and you'd have a more of a flow with the horses kind of moving along the beach. The other thing I would play around with a fair amount on this image would be the cropping. So the first thing on the crop, you have, in my opinion, too much sky relative to the lack of visual interest that's up there versus what I really want to be focused on as the viewer, the horses themselves, and more importantly, those horizontal lines that are existing. You got the lines of the beach, you got the lines of the sand, you got a little bit of the lines of the waves, then you have the horizon line there. So if you crop down quite a bit, almost into a panoramic type crop, you're going to have a lot of really strong lines going on here, and that's going to start to read a lot differently. So I think the concept's very solid. The other portion about the concept that's really good is what I call the rule of threes or rule of odds, where we want things to be in threes, fives, or sevens versus twos or fours. They're going to be a more engaging image when we look at that. So having 3 horses is going to be better than having 2 horses. And so some stuff there.
This is Outer Banks by Michael Rackover.
All right, so this one I came back to a few times to try to figure out what was not really resonating with me, but also what was resonating with me. And the thing I eventually kind of really settled on was almost this alligator type shape that I saw within the grass itself. But the thing I didn't like, and I would suggest, is that cropping kind of functionality as well. So there's so much dead space up at the top or potential visual interest that I found my eye really going back and forth between the top portion and the center part. And I didn't know where, as the viewer, you wanted me to be focused. And so I would make that determination and decision, and less of, well, you leave it open. No, I want you to be looking at this old log, this chunk of grass, this moss that's within there, the shape of an alligator, whatever. And so cropping that accordingly down into that thing.
This is Gator Island by Karen Lay.
Okay, well, good. I guess I didn't even read the title, but that absolutely fits. So she was in there. So, all right, another interesting image. I came back to this one a few times as I looked at it. Some of the minor things I would consider up on the top left of the image is that dark spot. It's kind of a thing I would either clone out or crop in a little bit. We're avoiding things at the fringes that are going to be very, very eye-catching. The other things within images like this is how and where can we find some sense of symmetry, rhythm, or flow. And I wasn't able to find definitive kind of flow lines within this particular ice. I like the gaps. I like some of the other patterns, but where and how am I going to be engaging with this image. So one thing on this one that I encourage on any type of abstract is to rotate the images, rotate them 90 degrees, rotate them a full 180, because they're going to start to read differently as you go through. And I'm not saying you didn't do that and this wasn't the intent, but I always, in my abstracts, I'm going to be rotating them around and look at them. The other thing I could say is I think if we did some mid-tone contrast adds to this, I think we'd get a lot more pop and variation with specifically the whites to show and some more of those cracking and other things to show within there.
This is Deep Freeze by Jackie Henney.
So similar to the last image, this is a strong image. I like the flow. I like the exposure time within there. I think you can strengthen this one up a little bit with dodging and burning, and also through maybe some tone curve adjustments to get a little bit more of the sense of the kind of the relief, if you want to think of it, or the sense of scale in between, not scale, sense of depth between the water and the ripples on the top. It feels kind of uniform, and with some just darkening of some of the water that's down below, maybe a little bit of tone adjustments, you're going to see a lot more of the water, maybe a little bit more of the rocks, and then your water is going to pop out a little bit more as well.
Swiftly Moving by Jim Kessel.
Okay. This was another interesting scene, and I'd like to, these are the kind of images to look a little bit at the raw files, if you have the raw files, ideally, to understand what you're dealing with. Once again, I'm going to want to see more contrast within the waves themselves. I'm going to want to see kind of those ripples within there are going to be darker, and you can do some dodging and burning or just some simple tone curve adjustments to get a lot more detail. There's a lot more detail in that wave you can really bring out and kind of bring it together. By the same token, going back to the earlier image, I'm wanting to see and understand where the focus is. So is the focus on the sky or is the focus on the wave? And if the focus is on the wave, which I would be where I'd want it to be, I'd be darkening my sky up some. So I do you could do a gradient adjustment just on your sky to kind of darken that down and really pull that focus more into the wave itself.
Wave at Pamud. Not sure how
it's supposed to be Pemaquid.
I think that's a misspell, actually.
Yeah, I love Pemaquid. It's a great place.
And this is by Cheryl Tumolo.
Okay, so this image, I kind of jumped back and forth a few times, different reads, I guess. This is one I kept coming back to. I like the almost serpent type flow of the branch going out into the water. Kind of leads you out a little bit. I like some elements of the reflection as well. What didn't match in the rest of the scene was a little bit of the white balance. And I'm going to try to show a technique when I do a couple hands-on demonstrations afterwards to kind of set the white balance a little bit, because I would expect it to have a little bit more coolness within the water and not be quite as white within there. It could be a tonal change or whatever else, but we could also still have some separation going on within that particular scene. I also think in a scene like this, using, if you could, move over to the left a little bit more and use that tree or as a little bit of a leading line to kind of lead you into the scene a little bit. And back towards the sky. As it stands right now, it kind of points you a little bit, but it doesn't quite completely balance with where the brighter part of the sky is as well. That's just my take.
Blue Marsh Sunset by Scott Fussell.
All right, nice one here. The two techniques I'm going to talk about, one is rotation, like I mentioned with the horses. So flipping this image, wanting that bird to move from left to right, the same way we think of the past and then remember the past and then envision the future. So it's the way movement oftentimes goes. The other technique I would use, because of the color. So if we look at the color, there's not a lot of separation between the bird itself and the background of the water. So I would do a subject adjustment. So I would target just the bird and then selectively lighten or darken based on preference. So whether we want to have the bird be darker or brighter, I think the bird would be better a little bit brighter, possibly a little bit cooler. And then the inverse selection would be to darken the water and kind of bring down the exposure. That would make the bird kind of feel a little bit more dimensional within the scene. So something else to consider.
Destin, Florida by Michael Rackover.
Okay, another image I remember liking quite a bit for the simplicity of the scene and the situation, that kind of moment within there, the glow that's going on down there within the actual frozen droplet itself. I really liked. The good thing as well within the scene, we have, you know, uniform lightness and bright and darkness within there, and the background that's not distracting, because you did a good job either in the field or post-processing blurring that background so we don't have that distraction within there. So I like this image.
This is Frozen Teardrop by Jackie Henney, and it got second place.
All right, I guess I just had a big water. I just was loving the droplets in the water, and this particular one is really what popped for me. So this is another strong image. We have some really interesting lines occurring through the flower petals itself. Good job on the exposure, focusing the image in the right spot, whether that's by aperture choice or focus itself, to be able to see the droplets. The other thing that's existing a little bit is there feels like a distinct separate element. So the front element that's got the droplets on it feels distinctly separate from the rest of the flower that's behind it, which I really like. Sometimes we can see those things feel very uniform and kind of mashed together. This one feels like it's a little bit further out.
Red, Yellow, Green by Mia Curran, and it got an honorable mention.
All right, so I went back and forth on this image a couple times as well, because this image does emulate a lot more of what I'm talking about for that long exposure, where you can see kind of the water starting to form what I call rivulets. You can see some of the detail that's kind of back there within there. I've seen, you know, different elements of face kind of down there within the scene as well. So that rock kind of took on different types of face things. So I liked what was going on. A couple of thoughts on this image, not necessarily critiques. One would be, I don't know what was in the foreground. Sometimes in scenes like this, I like a wide exposure more, a wide angle, to be able to see kind of the shape of how the water comes together. One thing to consider, but the other thing I would definitely say is to darken through adjustments on the right-hand side, the kind of greenery portions. I don't want you necessarily drifting over into the right-hand side where that grass is, as much as I was finding my eye. I was really kind of going back over to the right. When I want you focused in on the rock, I want you focused in on the water. So I would darken that area over on the right. Good image.
Face in the Water by Karen Lay, and this got third place. And that was the end of Class B Nature, and we'll go to Class A Nature at this point.
All right, we ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so I struggled a little bit what to say with this image, because it does encapsulate a little bit of a unique moment, and there's an element of creativity that kind of goes into that particular scene, showing the seal obviously out within the landscape as well. So I don't know how much I would necessarily criticize the composition of the capture moment, because it does show something that's different. I've seen way too many seal images of the seal just literally laying on the beach. There's nothing creative about that, versus this image has some creativity. I would look a little bit on cropping. Feels like we have a fair amount of space up at the top that may not be the area of interest. Probably also could do some dodging and burning. So selectively brightening the water, selectively darkening it a little bit to show a little bit more of the textures that are kind of surrounding within that area.
Chilling by Ginny Lodge.
Okay, so this one felt a little bit like it's probably an overwhelming scene to try to capture. But the thing I dinged this image on to some degree, beyond just interesting, it's an interesting image, and I like the capture and good exposure time. One is I want to see a darker sky a little bit, and so whether you're using a polarizer within the field or darkening the blues up in the sky a little bit more, I want to see that. It looks like it was one of those really blue sky days. But the thing that should be corrected in all images is there's a tremendous amount of dust spotting down there within the bottom of the waterfall in particular, and that was pretty distracting for me. I would definitively correct, clean up those dust spots down within there, or water spots or whatever, sensor noise. And then probably up in the sky, I would get rid of those two birds because you can't really tell what they are on the top right.
Water, Water Everywhere by Joanne Stam.
All right. I wish I had an image like this from my time at Iceberg Beach. I didn't get anything like this in my days. I was there. It's too windy. Literally too windy. Blew my tripod over. So I like it. Like the exposure time was a good choice. You're showing some of that glow down there within there. The challenge I would put forth, and maybe of other images within your series and set, is how or where can you get some of those leading lines that start to develop as the water's going back out? So can you have, or is there an opportunity, and this is just a learning opportunity, to have some of the lines further out, kind of leading you into the diamond within there? But nice scene. I like, it's a good capture, technically processed very well.
Not sure what just happened there. Hold on a second.
I think you hit L.
Oh, okay.
Hit it twice more. Once
Yep,
more. There you go.
So that was Ice Ice Baby by Lee Reeves.
Okay, so this image here, I can't quite tell if when it was on the tripod for the exposure, if the tripod slightly moved or it got bumped or it was really windy or something else. But what I would expect on an image like this, it would be sharper rocks to a degree. So sometimes I've photographed in scenes like this to try to get that water movement, which is really interesting. And I can see that's where you're going. But it's so windy, my tripod's moving considerably during that period of time. So weighing it down with my backpack, waiting in between gusts to actually capture the exposures would be part of it. I'd want to see a little bit more. There felt like some fuzziness within the rocks themselves. But that was just my take on that one.
Evening Waterworks by Tom Story.
Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous scene. Really interesting capture. We don't always get those nice captures of the light and the gradient of the light within there. I really like this image. I probably would do a couple tweaks. One is I would open up the shadows, especially on the bottom left, kind of make it more uniform. Don't have to open it up completely, but it's pretty dark on the left. I think there's opportunity to open up those shadows. And then on the bottom right, where we have that tree kind of coming in, I would just simply content aware fill that out. And then on the top portion, since we have kind of a break within the birds themselves, I probably would crop down just a fraction, I don't know, less than 10% of the image, but we have that white cloud, and then we have just a break in the birds. And if we kind of crop down, we could make those birds feel almost endless and not have that distracting element. But nice image.
Sunrise at Middle Creek by Ivan Bubb, and this got second place.
Okay, I wasn't sure to a degree what and where I should be looking within this image, and I couldn't tell if it was artistically kind of made to look a little a little more out of focus, or if that's just kind of the way it happened, or what was going on. And so in part, I kind of became, not with the photographer, but a little bit, I would say, frustrated in terms of understanding what I was looking at, or what you wanted me to look at. And so I found in my own work, if I'm frustrating my viewers where I'm not helping to guide them into what I want them to look at, or to kind of find levels of interest, they typically move on. So for me, yeah, there's a lot of water movement going on, but there's not a definitive place or rhythm or repetition or form that I can kind of look at and start to investigate. It's kind of like, just like the water, a little bit of chaos, and I kind of wander through it in different regards. So artistically, I think there's an element of a lot of strong intent, good exposure times as well, but I think there's maybe opportunities to bring it together more cohesively.
Sucked in by Vince Pellegrini.
All right. So similar to going back to the, I think it was an egret, or no, it wasn't an egret, heron. I'm going to want to find a way to get that frog to look slightly different, and kind of bring out some different quality potentially within there. So darkening the frog maybe just a little bit, or lightening the other part of the landscape as well. I don't need them to distinctly pop out, but right now I want you to see a little bit more of the detail. The other thing I would consider on the top left, kind of above the frog where we have that branch sticking out, would be to content aware fill or clone that out. It's kind of a distracting element that kind of takes away a little bit from the kind of more abstract feel of this image. It has some really interesting colors when we look at the scene. So if we're looking at kind of the iterations or the shapes of the different types of color, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, but then that branch on the top left kind of distracts me. So I'd want to minimize that eye distraction there and really focus within the rest of the scene.
Wet and Happy by Bob Gross.
All right. Absolutely love this image. Kept coming back to it for a wide variety of different reasons. At first, I was going to say, and it may be artistic choices, I probably would take some content aware brush, and definitely on the right side, you can see right on the corner, kind of middle part, there's a little bit of a fleck. I would definitely get rid of something like that so close to the edge. Down at the bottom part, I probably would content aware fill out some of those bubbles to get a little more uniformity. And I thought initially I was going to advise her, I didn't like the kind of floating pine needles. But as I looked at the image, it kind of gave it some structure and flow. So if we think about how the eye flows through an image, well, the pine needles kind of up towards the top portion, well, they kind of help to control the eye. There's almost like a little bit of some lightness and darkness gradation that allows you to kind of cycle out of the image, kind of go around the leaf and come back in. So that's really nice, really pleasing tones. I like what I'm dealing with, what I'm working with in this image.
Reeds of Heaven by Dutch Bagley, and this won first prize.
Going back to what we've talked about earlier, where and how do you want me to focus within this image? Do you want me looking at the moss? Do you want me really looking at the reflection, or do you want me looking at those bright, vibrant flowers that are out there in the area? So that becomes a little bit of the kind of that chaos and confusion that we sometimes enter into in scenes or situations like this. The other thing I would say is the top portion where the bright sky is there, that's clipped and kind of blown out. My eye will go to that area regardless of if you want me to go there. So making sure to either crop that out or potentially heal that away, it's going to help me to immerse myself a little bit more in the image versus my eye immediately is going to that bright spot up there. So something to consider.
Reflections by Larry Sam.
Okay, I wasn't sure what I was looking at here, but I liked it. I liked kind of going back and forth between, it felt like something you would see in Yellowstone in terms of some of the geyser pools, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. But then I liked that you could tell that the what was frozen down in beneath there, etc. I think this image could benefit from a vignette to kind of pull us in a little bit, and then probably or possibly even a little of that mid-tone contrast adjustment to try to get just a little bit more variation within there, because you're dealing with, and these images are complex, but you're dealing with different levels of depth, and there's ways we can make subtle adjustments to be able to show the rocks a little bit more, get those trees to pop a little bit, or brighten up whiteness and so on and so forth. So this is an image that warrants some more work. And this is a great image that would warrant a lot of trying different things. I don't know the photographer's skill level, but oftentimes if I have an image like this that I keep coming back to, I'm going to try different processing. I'm going to try different techniques. So thinking about how could I get those trees, those leaves to pop a little bit? What technique could I use, or so on? So,
Edge of Winter by Nic Stover.
So this is an image. When I look at it, the rock in the water doesn't quite look correct. And what I've found through trial and error, I guess, is I can use HDR processing programs or things like Photomatics, or even push things a little bit farther in other images than I can with water images. In particular, when you do those types of programs or offerings, it brings about a little bit of that unrealistic or not true feeling that's out there within the scene. So I don't know if that's exactly what happened, or if we pushed saturation or clarity a little bit too much, but I wouldn't expect to see as much openness within those rocks per se. I'm not completely sure. It could be white balance or whatever else. The whole image as well could also stand to be a little bit darker to be able to pull in. I'm always trying to pull the viewer in on water images into the main focus and have them feel like they're deeper within there.
High Surf Warning by Tom Story.
Well, I didn't get an image anywhere like this when I went to this place, so well done. So I like the exposure. We're showing a lot of the churn within there. I'm wanting to see a little bit darker. So selectively darkening up the water a little bit to show some of that relief. So dodging and burning, maybe darkening that up. You're going to see then more of the white kind of popping within there. But the kind of bowl-shaped choice, remember going back to the one waterfall image where I said I sometimes want to see a wide angle to see kind of how the whole bowl. Well, this has a nice bowl shape. It has a good flow. The eye can kind of roll through and investigate this image in different ways.
Never Ending Water by Vince Pellegrini.
Another interesting image. Different iterations, obviously combining different curvature and different lines. This image, for me, I would have probably done it as a black and white, just personal preference, because there's not a strong color. So if we go back to the one image that I had awarded first place, that had a lot of strong color variation within there. Lots of different subtle hues and tones. This one doesn't have a lot of strong color, which is fine. But then in that regard, this one would probably read potentially even a little bit stronger as a black and white. Just food for thought.
Reflective Art by Larry Stamm.
Okay, so I appreciate the focus zoom, but when I've done my focus zooms that have been actually the most impactful, and I wouldn't argue that any of my images in focus zoom have been exceptionally impactful, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. What I have tried to do, though, is have the subject focus in on less chaotic environments, so more simple things. So we have something here like a massive amounts of icebergs that are within there is going to be a very, very chaotic scene. Well, adding another level of chaos in terms of that focus zoom is just making the scene feel very, very chaotic and agitating to me. And what I go for most of the time within my work is a lot of calm, a lot of awe, a lot of wonder within my images, not necessarily, oh my God, this just feels like a jumbled mess. What do I do? So that's just my personal preference and something to consider within there.
Ice Burst by Lee Reeves.
Once again, another strong image here, good sense of place. This is the kind of stuff you can, if you're selling prints, this is the kind of thing that people want to hang on their walls because it has a lot of that mystery, has a feeling of that calm morning, which we oftentimes go for, that calm, that wow, what would it feel like to be there? Good job in this image as well, whether it was through post-processing or capture, to have the one island feel closer, the other island to feel just a little bit further back. Also a good job in when you captured keeping the reflection. Oftentimes we see trees that are cut off halfway, but we have the full element lost or kept up above. And so keeping the symmetry in place makes this image feel very balanced as well. So like it.
Hopewell Lake by Ivan Bubb.
All right, I took issue with this image, and I'm sorry for that. And once again, I guess is what I'm here for, a little bit of what I would do differently or whatever. So I love the frozen, I love the concept, frozen leaf within there, but I think you put the focus on the wrong thing. And the focus on the wrong thing would have been having the tree limbs out of focus and having that leaf in sharp focus. And the reason it is because right now it just feels kind of like an orange blob that's not really bringing into the image, and it's almost distracting away from the particular limbs that are there. And personally, I would have liked to have seen either both of them in focus, or having the leaf be the thing in focus and the limbs be that kind of more mysterious, less detailed portion. So I would consider in a scene like this, what do you want that focus to really be on? And in this case, that orangeness or that brightness of that leaf is very, very distracting. And if it was in focus, it would be very engaging, but being so out of focus, it feels just kind of like a blotch that's out there. So that's me being hyperly critical of an interesting image. It's a very interesting image, but that was just the way I would have probably chose myself personally.
Leaf in Frozen Stream, Parent Limbs Reflecting by Jenny Lodge.
Okay, so this image, I was distracted by the blown out highlights down below the waterfall and within the water. So we clipped pretty hard. We clipped pretty hard also up on the top part. And so for me, within an image like this, if we clip that hard, A, look and see if you have other exposures where you didn't clip. B, go back and you can spot adjust sometimes with making adjustments and not have your clipping come through. And then see if you get to the end and you have that much bright clipping, especially in a scene like this, then I would consider clone stamping or content aware filling that out so it isn't as eye attraction. So that eye will always go to the brightest spots. It's a technique. It's a well-proven principle. And so for me, I just keep going back to those blown out clips within the image.
The Fall of Man by Nic Stover.
The colors in this image felt off to me. Something wasn't quite right. I think it's a drone image. And then the other thing I'm looking for in a scene or a situation or an image like this is flow. And kind of just looking down from this particular angle, we kind of don't get flow really leading us somewhere. And aerial photography is a big challenge oftentimes to do stuff like this. And what I found oftentimes is rather than be as high up, would have been to be a little bit lower down and then work with some of those lines that are down there within the marsh to kind of lead us back in to the particular image. Or into the scene, excuse me.
Undercover by Dutch Bagley.
Another nice image here. A lot of good iterations on the theme of water. Really good job on the droplets. Really good job having this particular thing within focus. I like the choice of the crop. I like the choice of the angle. as well. It's kind of not a traditional like straight across. It kind of goes on a little bit of an angle, creates a lot of lines and separation within the image. The bottom portion, either by focusing or by post-processing, being out of focus is a good solid choice, just as the top left. So it feels when you look at the image, we have the center point really in focus, and then the top and the bottom out of focus. And that's really good because then as the viewer, I'm not spending time trying to figure out where does the viewer want me to look or what's going on. I'm really now focusing in on the details of the particular things of water. So strong image.
Temporary Suspension by Bob Gross, and this got honorable mention.
Yeah, water droplets. I guess I was in a water droplet mood. I love this one too. I like the simplicity of it. I like the elegance of it. I like the portrait type orientation. We had a discussion on a presentation I gave on Saturday to the Sierra Club about centering our images in terms of composition, and how one guy was like, I was told never to do it. And I said, oh, I do it all the time. And the reason I do it, or when I do it, is when I have a symmetrical subject. And you have a very symmetrical subject here. Center point orientation, center point composition is absolutely the right choice, because it still feels very balanced and interesting. So good choice on the crop, good choice on the composition, strong image.
Sundew by Joanne Stam, and this got third place. And that would be the end of nature. We'll go on to pictorial. Just a comment for our club, for nature, we cannot do any content aware fill or cloning out of subject matter. So we follow the PSA rules on that. So just for the members to be aware, good suggestions if it's not going to be in nature. So we'll go to Class B pictorial.
I haven't tried this stuff yet, not as in water, but I like the moment, the capture, a lot of the things. It feels like there's an opportunity to have that lemon in a little bit more focus.
Thank you.
The other thing I would say right out of the gates, and I think it is eligible in here, and wouldn't even be content and will be spot healing brush. These little flecks, especially down on the left, are very distracting. They're catching some of the light and everything else. And also I would just want the focus really on there. So I would definitely spend some time healing out those flecks, those little spots. I wouldn't worry about the center part, but at the top right as well. The idea being we don't want distracting elements taking us out of the center portion. So these little flecks kind of around the corners, keeping us focused in there.
Water Drop by Cheryl Tumalo.
I struggled with this image to figure out the flow. So we kind of have a little bit of a leading line flow leading us in, and then we hit the bridge and kind of go over to the right and kind of get pushed out of the image, so to speak, if we think the eye flow through the image. So I wanted to have a little bit different kind of flow with less of a push out. But the bigger issue I had is how bright the sky is. It's very, very bright. And once again, going to the brightest spots, I'm wanting to see less of a bright sky because I'm thinking that the bridge and the house is more of the interest. And so if you don't have it captured with a less bright sky, well, then I would look at cropping and really cropping this image in there, because the whole image feels very, very bright up here.
Grings Mill Pond by Al Harris.
Interesting from a couple perspectives. One thing I would add is I wanted to see, looks like a panorama shot with the phone. And sometimes when we do these, we want to complete the full portion of it a little bit. Sometimes I do panoramas on my phone in wide angle, because what we have going on is these lines that are intersecting and not really going anywhere. And so if you had this line coming in from the right and this line coming in from the left and intersecting in one point, well, then you'd have an anchor point that could kind of push out further within the image and kind of bring it some movement. I found myself kind of following both lines in both directions, and neither one of those lines really led me to an interesting point. Similar thing on what is the subject, what is the level of focus. within there. Where do you want me to actually be looking? And I'm not sure where you wanted me to be looking within this image.
Summer Hailstorm by Scott Fussell.
So a couple things on this one. One, obviously, I don't think there's butterflies that big in Pennsylvania, and if there are, I'm sorry. Those are pretty large. So my personal thought on that is, is that part of adding to the image, or what parts and pieces are really interesting? So you have this really cool, look at that fence. And I just kept coming back to this fence like time and time again. That's a really interesting fence, and that's really leading up to an interesting barn. So is my focus really in the right spot? Are you working with the assets you have within this image to kind of bring out the right kind of flow? So I would be working less with the things like the butterflies and much more with kind of that scene. It looks like there's some ducks or geese, and you got the cows. You got the barn, you got that really cool curved fence. We don't get a lot of curved fences like that within there. And so I'd be working more on that.
Along a Country Road by Mia Curran.
Gorgeous. Absolutely stunning. These are the kind of images that, I sell at art fairs regularly. I could sell this image without a doubt. Evokes a lot of that beauty, a lot of that mystic. Good job with the lines within there. The only change I would make is cropping that top 5% off, because that bright part up above, my eyes wandering out. I think you could keep it really down in there. Great timing on where you have the boat too, kind of close to, you got your two subjects really close to each other. Kind of that feeling, evokes that feeling of kind of sailing off or motoring off into the distance.
Corson's Inlet at Sunrise by Jackie Henney. First prize.
So I think you got solid concept here, and this is the point in time where, depending on what the capture was, to use that focal length to our benefit and zooming in more. So we have the person up here at the top, kind of I would consider a little bit of a distraction. Definitely the brick up at the top left. I wouldn't want that in as part of my image. And I think there's interesting different patterns down here within the lily pads themselves. And so then we have the lilies over on the right, kind of a distracting element, not quite in there. So I would be focusing more into what kind of patterns and shapes and things can I get just out of that pad itself. So spending more time and looking at how things will line up and the circles and the forms, etc.
Nan's Pads by Jim Kessel.
So this one we have, I can't comment on Niagara. I've yet to go there, but we have we had some sensor noise, some dust spots, some scratches. So up here on the top right, I noticed some stuff quite a bit down there within there. Also within there, and maybe the boat doesn't move in further, but maybe to get the boat as it's more in the center part of the rainbow. So if we look at the curvature of the rainbow, well, then we can start to establish we have something in that center point. Well, it starts to feel a little bit more balanced as well. The other thing I would consider is if you did have an image with the boat further over, and I don't know if they go much further, it would be either moving over to the right a little further if you can, because we have this big dark block down here at the left that's also kind of breaking up some of the symmetry. So if you think about it and we were further over to the right ever so slightly, well, all of a sudden we're going to have a uniform line going across the bottom versus hitting into the grass. The boat over a little bit further to the right, or you further to the right a little bit, well, you're going to have some symmetry kind of in place there. So looking for symmetry wherever you can get it, or some types of balance is going to help in these types of situations.
Niagara Falls 3 by Michael Rackover.
All right, liked this image for a wide variety of reasons. One, it kind of has that feeling of really and never ending. It kind of goes out, particular to the cropping, leading us out into the scene. We have some lines kind of getting formed down here within the water. These are the kind of things I'd spend a little bit of time as well, just lightly dodging and burning and kind of leading in to help the eye. I like the crop. You did a good job leaving space on both sides, kind of uniform space between the columns. So it feels, relatively speaking, balanced. I like a little bit of the sand. It gives me a little bit of a place to kind of stand within the image as well. So evokes some strong sense of viewership.
Beneath the Pier by Karen Lay, third place.
All right, so I want to see more in this image than you're providing me, because it's an interest. These are the things where the photographer has a lot of good opportunity. And what's going on here is the side angle doesn't show quite as much as the emotion we might see of directly into his face. Or even potentially like over his shoulder, like the viewpoint of what's there. What I'm looking at and looking through is over to some tools that are on there on the bench. And then I have the, the street in the background and the signage, et cetera. Versus if you're standing on the other side and creatively shooting part of the image with the block there, and then part of the image with his face, well, you're bringing yourself into, or you're bringing that viewer into that scene and forcing them to look at his work, but also look at his face. And so I think those are the kind of things we can do in scenes like this.
Frozen Sculpture by Tim Huey.
Great one. I like this one. I like, obviously she did a good job posing for you to be able to hold things in place. But I like the cropping of this particular image. Did a good job leaving space around there. It's one of those images you pause and you look at more than once as you kind of look through it. So well done.
Frozen Tears by Kathy Patelis, second place.
So this one is one as well where I don't necessarily, it's an interesting choice to go black and white, but the sky itself feels the whole image feels a little bit too white for me. I would want to see a little less brightness out there within the sky. And then by bringing the brightness down in certain areas, you're going to see more of the lines and the definitions that are without there, because it's really bright on the left. And once again, I'm wandering over that way versus I'm thinking you're wanting me to be looking a lot more at the stand-up paddle border, and also some elements of just that, if based on the title, kind of that thing kind of all the way through. So that kind of steps of the waves and kind of that whole experience that's up there. The other thing I'd say is if you want the sky to be bright like that, well, then you need to continue that all the way through, because what we have going on is if you have a uniform brightness all the way across, we wouldn't be able to see those clouds over there on the right. So if you want that uniform brightness, continue that all the way through. Everything should be uniformly bright, or take it down and bring back some of those cloud details that are behind there.
Conversations with God by Jackie Henney.
Similar to the other images of Niagara, not quite the same, but we have some sensor noise. We have some sensor dust up here on the top. Definitely, we would clean that out. Some stuff here in the center as well. This one doesn't have a lot of that strong sense of place. Yeah, we have the waterfall, but what's the focus? Is it the waterfall? Is it the rainbow? What are we really looking at? And I don't have the magical answers for these types of scenes or situations, but the thing I do in my seascape photography and my mountain photography in particular is I want to give my viewer a place to stand so they can feel like they're there. And so whether that's backing off and using a telephoto to get some piece that's in there that gives a sense of place, or switching to a wide angle that shows some leading element that kind of engages you into the image, those are things to look at or consider.
Niagara Falls 1 by Michael Rackover.
Going back to, well, I think this one was about Always a Photographer or something like that. I like the title and that kind of instantaneous moment. This person obviously is just like my wife, she has more pictures of me taking photos than, of me actually taking photos, I think. But in doing that, though, I see the tripod over on the right-hand side. I would I just get rid of that element so it's not distracting. But more importantly, I would get behind that person kind of taking the picture and show a little bit of that element of what they were seeing. So going back to the ice sculpture as well, of like, if you're going to put the dedicated photographer kind of in place, well, put a little bit of what that person's framing up there. So getting almost a lot closer to them or directly behind them to show that element within there.
Dedicated Photographer by Jim Kessel.
Okay, so this image I came around and around a few times on, and I kind of liked a lot of things. First things first, though, there's a looks like a cropping error on the left-hand side. I noticed this in my image too. So you have something protruding in on the left, and I couldn't quite figure out what was in place there. The other thing about this image is I think the exposure was just a hair too long. If I look at the image, because we've lost, we should have a little bit more of the detail up there within the sky and potentially a little bit more down within here. The other thing I would think on this image is it has a little bit of work. I think it could be done on the white balance. This all feels very uniformly green. And I think we should be seeing a little bit more of the blue kind of that you would expect in a scene or a situation like this.
Here Remains by Karen Lay.
This was one I will look at when I show white balance. The colors did not quite feel right to me. It feels very, very purple, more so than I would expect to see. The sky itself, we don't have that detail. So we have some of that white balance bleed over into the sky. So ideally, when we're setting our white balance correctly, our warms are going to be warms and our cools are going to be cool, literally from the standpoint of we shouldn't have bleed over. So we should be able to get a lot of that definition within there.
Misty Blue Marsh by Scott Fussell.
I wasn't able to silence my.
All right, at first I was like, what? Why are we not focusing on the water skier? She's so happy. She's giving me the peace sign. And then as I looked at this image a second time, I thought, I love it. I love it from where it's focused. So you did a really good job of having this part in focus. If this whole scene was out of focus, it would not work for me. But the water itself, that splash, is very strongly in focus, and you can see a lot what's there. The rope itself is in focus. So the focus point that you chose within this image is great. And then you can see just a little bit of that magic. You can see just enough of her smile that's back within there. So I really like it.
Peace by Tim Huey, honorable mention.
Okay, so these are interesting images to try to work on and work out. What I would suggest within a scene like this is, let's avoid things like the fence at the bottom, just the teeny tiny portion doesn't need to be in there. And then the other thing is to get closer to the grasses, almost immerse yourself in those, create a framing opportunity with the grass itself, and maybe just one of those beach umbrellas that's back there within the background. So you have these blue beach umbrellas that are really interesting and dynamic. Well, you have the grasses as well. And so right now it just kind of, we have a lot of things breaking the horizon line. We got some people here, but not there. We don't have balance. And I think you could get into the grass, use it to kind of frame your scene and bring into one particular area.
Beach Grass by Al Harris.
Okay, what was this image about? Okay, I liked this image. I think what's going on here, though, and I've been guilty of this more than once, is you've opened up your shadows too much. So when we open up our shadows, we lose a lot of depth. And what I'm going for here is I want to be able to feel some of that depth of how close the island is, or the thing on the right versus the thing on the left, and that's out there within the distance. So if you didn't open your shadows too much, and this is truly kind of the way it looked, well, what we're going to see pretty quickly is we could do just some lightly dodging and burning to create a little bit of depth and dimensionality. So the key to something like this is I want to bring back a little bit of that depth and dimensionality within the scene.
Perfect Day by Mia Curran. And we'll now go, that was the end of Class B pictorial, and our last grouping, Class A pictorial.
Okay. Feels a little painterly, but also feels a little bit like it's a natural type of image. And I guess where I'm coming from is when I look at scenes or situations like this, there's a couple things I would change kind of right out of the bat. I like the colors. I like the tones. I definitely would content aware or spot heal brush out. I don't have to content aware if that's not allowed, but spot heal brush back here over the top of the dock. That's the distracting white elements. I don't know if you can get rid of them or not, but I would do it. Same thing on these things on the side, like this little teeny piece of grass over on the right-hand side. Get rid of that. But more importantly, this boat feels, this canoe feels very almost more in focus than the rest of the scene. And so if it's all designed to be very painterly, well, I'd figure out a way to make that boat a little less sharp, because it almost is sharp enough to feel different than the rest of the scene versus everything else feels very kind of magical. But good tones and colors within it.
At Rest by Bob Gross.
Scale and sense of place. I would back up a little bit on this image, and you could see you actually had an opportunity to create some of the symmetry, the circles that are going on within the pool. So I'm wanting to see that full shape kind of potentially get included all the way in. If it's about the fountain, well, then I wouldn't have the girl in there. But if it's about the girl and the fountain, I would be in closer, showing some of that interaction that she's actually having with the water as part of the fountain as a personal thing.
Pineapple Fountain by Joanne Stam.
Been here, didn't get an image like this. It feels a little on the, once again, I could be wrong, a little bit more on the HDR kind of side of things where the water just doesn't quite look right. It doesn't ever turn out completely the way we want it to when we use these types of programs or add-ins. And so if there's an opportunity to redo this one without that, I think you can get more realistic colors and a little bit more realistic water within there.
Relentless by Vince Pellegrini.
Okay, so this one, I think what I thought I saw on this one. I like the scale of the rock and the people. I feel like, and I don't know if there's a good way around it. I'm wanting to see a little bit more back there within the water. If I'm going to get lead back there, and it started to trail off and get a little fuzzy when I looked at it back to the right. So it's almost like if that's going to be in focus, if that's in focus, then that's great, but it's kind of somewhat out of focus and a little distracting. So I would consider kind of blurring the background just a little bit more so you can't even see some of the detail, and just working to bring into the rock on the left and the teeny people in the center.
Together by Tom Story.
All right, I like this image. I went back and forth on this one quite a bit. I scored it high. I can't remember if I placed it, but I scored it really high. Sense of place, good lines. Once again, we got those lines kind of leading in and echoing. A little bit of the curvature going back to the right. Good job using the people within the scene to help tell the story. Good job getting close to the side. Most of the time, if you see people take images like this, they're standing out there in the middle of the street, and you don't have as much of an anchor to kind of push you through there. I also like the post-processing. It's a little bit of a warmer type of tone, not as quite as colorful, maybe even a sepia. And I like that. It kind of evoked a lot within there.
Rainy Night by Larry Stamm, and it got honorable mention.
All right, I did still score it. I couldn't remember. Okay, so a little bit too much cowbell on this one, or a little bit too much water. I know you're trying to show that water spray coming out, and you got some lines kind of leading back within there, which are good. I would say trying this one with a little less exposure would be interesting, because then it wouldn't look all like a big white kind of blob down in here. I think you could bring out some of that textures and churn that are potentially existing within there. I also would either crop it at the left or heel out on the top left, where you have those little looks like parking lot things on the top left, or parking lot stakes. That's a little bit distracting versus the whole scene as a whole.
What a Spray, Ivan Bubb.
Okay, so what am I supposed to be looking at within this image, and how do we get better separation is the thing that kept coming to mind. I like the frost. I like a lot of what I'm dealing with, but I'm wanting to see a little bit more separation. And I think this is one where if you play with your white balance, and I have no right or wrong answer, lightening it up or warming it up, cooling it down, and then adjusting things a little bit, it'll be interesting to see what you can get to pop out to get things to show. Because what I want to see within this image is more of the frost textures to kind of pop out within here.
Abstract by Nic Stover.
So this one, we have a little bit too much sky, in my opinion. Could still kind of keep that one. I'd also want to see or consider kind of the further point of the boat. Still want to have a little bit of the boat, maybe the person in there, but kind of the way this is in the back, it doesn't have a lot of balance. We got a lot of dark, heavy boat on the right and a lot of bright sky over there on the left. So it doesn't quite balance out completely. You don't have to crop out all of the sky, just this top portion possibly, so you can see we have a color gradient change. I don't know if that's in post-processing or whatever else. We go from kind of this blue purple undertone to a very gray sky right here, which is very distracting. I'm not saying you have to get rid of this undertone, but I would probably crop right around, I crop about 15% off the top to go through it. I love the rays, a really good sun rays kind of coming down through there.
Lake Erie Sunset Boat Ride by Jenny Lodge.
Too much brightness in the sky in this particular image. So either taking the highlights down or starting over, because it's just too distracting up in that period of time. I know it's like the midnight kind of thing. Same thing also, similar thing also on backing up just a hair, because I want to see that full reflection of that steeple in the water.
Midnight Mass on Lofoten by Lee Reeves.
Wasn't sure where to go within here. And the reason is you have two stronger leading lines. You have the river itself and you have the road, but neither one of them are kind of being used in a way to lead me into the scene. So I think working the scene and working either that road and the twist within there, or working the river in that bend, or finding a way to almost work with both of them is going to help to lead me in. Because what's going on right now is I'm kind of getting let in, and then I'm immediately exiting off to the left and going down that valley, which is not where I think you want me to go. So finding a way to keep me engaged in on the buildings themselves is probably something to consider.
Train Spotting, Vince Pellegrini.
Okay, interesting. Obviously captures a period of time and a place within the moment. What's going on within there? I would consider opening up. We've talked about too bright. I would say this one's on the border of a little bit too dark. We don't want to brighten it up a ton, but I probably would open up the shadows just a hair more, kick up my whites to show just a little bit more of that mist, a little bit more of kind of what's going on.
Morning launch, Bob Gross.
Interesting image here. A lot of different things going on. I can't criticize necessarily the, blues and the yellows or anything else that's occurring. Just do simple fixes. Top left, once again, distracting element kind of right in the corner. Definitely would take care of that. Without having a conversation with the artist, I couldn't tell you what the person likes or doesn't like about it. It does feel a little bit busy with a lot of different textures and colors, which can sometimes be a good thing and sometimes be a little bit of a distraction.
Beneath the Surface by Nic Stover, 3rd place.
Definitely doesn't feel right in terms of the uniform kind of way the water looks and the rocks itself. So going back to what I said earlier about programs or adding too much clarity or whatever else, I don't want to see that much uniform brightness within an image like this.
Getting Up Close, Tom Story.
Great. Great timing to be able to capture this kind of all the way through. Obviously, I like the colors. I like the uniformity of the colors. I just noticed, I think I noticed it the other day, there's a couple splotches that you can see on the background that you could just, without content aware filling, just spot heel brush those out to kind of give that uniform background. You can see those in there, but I like it. I like the timing. It's just nice, good symmetry, good uniform. You could possibly crop this one in from the right just a little bit and have it be a little bit more symmetrical. Would maybe help, maybe it wouldn't, but as a whole, interesting.
That was Light Bulb by Larry Stam.
Going back to the similar image from Norway, taking down the brightness in the sky. If we take down our highlights up there, you're going to get more of the texture detail out there within the clouds as well.
Midnight Red on Lofoten by Lee Reeves.
I like this one. This was an interesting image for me. I think it was something about get the arc ready or something like that, or waiting for the arc. And it obviously shows the flooding, a lot of the other things. These kind of images are difficult to fully critique from a couple of perspectives. You're possibly limited to where you could go, whatever else. But if I were to look at a scene or a situation like this, what I'm finding of visual interest are the cattle and the sheep, obviously the flooded water, which you can tell, a little bit of the roads. I would probably potentially try to consider getting down almost to the same level as them, lower. I've taken images like this literally laying on my stomach with a telephoto because they're going to establish just those animals as the subject with that background of the flooded water or the roads or whatever else between there. I don't feel like the buildings or the power lines or things add to the scene. I think it could be even stronger by getting in a little bit closer to the animals and showing the water.
Waiting for the Ark by Joanne Stam.
All right, love this image. I think it could benefit from cropping the top 20%-ish, and you're not going to lose that effect. The trees, the mist within the trees, and then the silhouetting of the people within there is just fantastic. Really interesting. Excellent choice to process this one in black and white as well. Good capture. You can see there's not blurring on the people. Good cloud and mist detail within there. I just think it's a great picture.
Hot Spring Taurus by Jenny Lodge, 1st place.
Okay, so I struggle with critiquing infrareds because they're so interesting and unique, and I like this one a fair amount, a lot amount, I guess you could say. The things I would consider is how to work with that bench a little bit differently. So these are the times when we get out to an interesting and compelling scene like this, where I'll spend a lot of time, different heights, different angles, different focal lengths to try to work with the natural environment and what's there. Because we got some lines that are kind of anchoring within the lake or the river itself, but we have this interesting bench and we got this dock that's there. Well, how do we create a visually more compelling scene within there? Can we back up and frame within the trees? So we're seeing this bench and the majesty, because what I'm going for, what I'm looking for, and I'm not loving about this particular scene as well, and even just cropping 25% of the top, is there's a lot of dead space up there within the sky, and there's a lot of visual interest you have down within the trees, within the bench, within everything else. And so I'd be looking at or thinking about ways to pull us into that visual interest field more.
The boat launch by Ivan Bub, second place, and that was the last of that series. So Nick, thank you very much for excellent critiques and very thorough process. Just a comment for our club, pictorial, anything goes, which means content aware is great. And cloning, anything you want to do for pictorial is fine. I'm going to stop screen sharing. One of the exciting parts about this submission process for this month was we had 6 new submitters who had not participated before. So my last minute plea for entries was apparently successful. So I thank everyone who participated. And Nick, if you have the time and the ability to show a few images, that would be great.
I do. Let me make a quick little exit out. I'll be right back. Let's just say I had a lot of water this afternoon. So just give me 2 minutes and I'll be right back.
Okay. So I'll take advantage of that and go back and just screen share and show the winners. See if I can do that quickly. Congrats to those who did well tonight. Let's see. So this is Class A pictorial. First place, Jenny Lodge. Second place, Ivan Bub. Third place, Julie Stauffer. And honorable mention, Larry Stam. Class B pictorial. First place, Jackie Henney. Second place, Frozen Tears by Kathy Patelis. Third place by Karen Lay. Honorable mention by Tim Huey. Class A Nature. First place, Dutch Bagley. Second place, Ivan Bub. Third place, Joanne Stam. Honorable mention, Bob Gross. And then Class B Nature. First place, Mia Curran. Second place, Jackie Henney. Third place, Karen Lay. And honorable mention, Mia Curran. So I hope you all enjoyed that. I'll stop screen sharing and we'll wait for Nick to get back.
All right, I'm back.
Okay, Nick, take over. You can screen share.
All right, let's go into share here. Let me make a couple quick adjustments to my screen. All right, so now we should be able to see that larger. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the things I talked about within the confines of what I'm working with. So let's look at, it's not going to be quite as dramatic on some of these images because they're already processed JPEGs. But the technique I use to set white balance, I think is the key one. So let's look at this image here, and it's good white balance and good tones. But the way I would want to check white balance or take a look at is I take my base image and I take my vibrance and my saturation to 100. And that basically super nuclearizes my image from the get-go. And what I'm then looking for as I'm adjusting my white balance is that bleed over I was talking about. So like something like that's going to be far too warm. Something like that's going to be too cool. And I'm looking for just the light level of bleed over in something like that. So I probably actually would cool this image off a little bit where I don't have a lot of my shadows bleeding into or warming up into, in this case, my shadows are warming up into areas where my highlights should be, or in this case, I'm cooling down my highlights. And what I'm going for is anywhere that's getting any level of direct sun should be in some type of a situation where that is feeling warm. So that's how I check my white balance kind of all the way through. And so it doesn't make a huge difference in a processed JPEG like this, but a lot of images in particular is going to make a massive difference in terms of how we look at the image. So it's going to be in a raw image, it's going to make a big difference as we go through. So that's one thing to keep in mind, a technique I use a fair amount. Another technique I use, and we'll just pick another example. I think I should have just earmarked these ones here. Oh, let's look at this one. Actually, I want to show on the Outer Banks one. This is interesting. So we go up into this image here, and if we go to photo and we flip it horizontal, well, now we have them moving from left to right, which has a different level of movement within the image. And then simply just cropping it down is going to bring about, and then we got to straighten our horizon just ever so slightly as well, eyeballing it. So sorry. So something like that. Well, now we have lots and lots of definitive lines within the image, lines within the water, lines within the sand, more movement, more symmetry, definitive lines and colors within there. So I think it's added to a stronger image here. Then when I talked about adding mid-tone contrast, there's a couple ways to do it. One, we can just simply go to our contrast slider and start adding, which is going to have different effects. But the better way to do it oftentimes is just to go down to our tone curve. And if we're going right into the middle portion, we're going to be dragging down just on that middle portion. And if you watch my histogram, watch up here on the top right, I'm pulling more detail into the center part of the image. And I'm adding a lot of that mid-tone contrast. And so without brightening or highlight a lot more within the image, I'm making big adjustments. So that's my before and after, just adding those tone curve adjustments within an image like this. And so those are the kind of things I look at doing just kind of out of the gates as I post-process. Another couple things I think I mentioned in a couple images. Let's look at this one. This one here. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so I had one that was perfect to show this example on. I can't remember which one it was. So sorry about that. Maybe it'll come back to me in a second. So, okay. So the other thing though, I want to show dodging and burning and the two techniques I use for that. So let's go to one of the nature images. We'll just take, this one here is the one I wanted to show on dodging and burning. Okay, so we have the swiftly moving where I mentioned we have a lot of the darkness down below that we're not bringing out, a lot of brightness up here. So the way I dodge and burn is in Photoshop. So I go right click, edit in Photoshop. So now I'm over in Photoshop. I gotta maximize my screen here. And I have the whole TK modules and masks loaded. You don't need to understand all this stuff. If you do or don't, it's great. I teach classes on it. Happy to turn you on to some stuff. But what we can do in the dodging and burning is we can build our masks pretty easily. So these are just our masks here. And we can build a mask that's going to target just the dark tones. And so when we build these masks, We can choose a darks 1, which is going to be a lot of the darks within the image, but something like a darks 2, darks 3 is too dark. So when we look at this part of the image right here, you can see this part that's in white is going to be targeted by this particular mask. And so if we do just a universal dodging and burning, well, we're going to be brightening up areas of the image we don't necessarily want to be brightening up. And so all I want to do is target these parts. So then I just go into the burn layer and select something there. And now I can just start to paint down just the darker tones within the image. And so now I'm adding some tonality just down in the areas while I'm keeping that portion of the brights within there. So now I've kept the brights intact, but I've added a lot of tonality down there within the darker parts of the image, which is what I want to do, because now you can see the water, you can see the detail a lot more. Within there, you have a lot more of the whites down there within there. So that is definitely one of the techniques. We've taken away some of that. And now a lot of that image is really showing through better. Maybe you do it too much. You can adjust your opacities here as well, something to consider in that regard. So that's why I love dodging and burning within images. This image here was this is what I want to showcase. So we have an image like this, and we want to get the egret, sorry, the heron to pop out a little bit more. Well, first thing I would do would be that flipping of the horizontal. So now we have that movement from left to right. It looks and it reads just a little bit better, but now I want to get him or her, I'm not sure which one it is, to pop out a little bit more. And we can do these through the local adjustments. So if we go over in the develop module, we go under the brush, sorry, the masking now they call it. And then we hit select subject. Well, now we can actually select the subject, and look at that. Photoshop or Lightroom does an amazing job of selecting the subject. And so now that we've selected that subject, we can make the choice or the decision of what we want to do. Do we want to lighten? Do we want to darken within that confines as well? So now we got the subject selected. Well, let's start with the background. And to do that, all we have to click over here is invert it. And now we've inverted a mask that's back behind the entire bird. The birds completely stand out, and that's the mask itself. Well, now we can go through and make some adjustments just to the background. So now we're taking that exposure down. Now we're cooling off the back just a little bit more. If we take the highlights down, take our exposure down just a little bit more, take our whites down, take our blacks down. We're just kind of fine tuning. Maybe we remove a little bit of the saturation from the background, or we could add a little bit more, whatever we want to do. And so now we've decreased that, and just in that before and after, well, now we have a bird that is coming out much, much more from the background itself. Then we can create a new mask, do another select subject. It's going to correctly select our subject again. And we're going to do a little bit of the opposites. So now we might warm the bird up just a hair. I mean, we're talking 2-3 points, very, very subtle warm up. And then we're going to add a little bit of clarity, add just a little bit of texture. And you can see I'm not overdoing it. We're talking on a scale of 1 to 100. I'm adding 8 or 14 points, adding just a little bit of sharpness to that, adding just a little bit of saturation to the bird. And through those adjustments, well, now we have that bird really showing out much, much more than it is in the particular scene or the earlier one in there. So just doing adjustments like that and keeping things kind of working in opposite is going to help our subjects to come out and kind of pop out a little bit more within there. So that's if you just did those dodging and burning and kind of selected subject techniques, that's going to help a tremendous amount. But I also want to make sure to leave a little bit of time for questions or things I said I was going to cover and I forgot, or any number of other things.
So we can open mic and speak up, I think would be the simplest with questions. I found your critiques to be very educational, Nick, and very supportive. So thank you. Very, very good job.
Well, yeah, I'm the be all end all. So you have to listen to everything I say and take it completely the way I said it. No, it's I should have talked at the beginning about I'm a photographer with my own biases, my own ways of doing my work, the one way what I like to photograph, my preferences as well. I'm simply offering my objective, and I encourage each and every one of you to take what I say with a grain of salt. Hopefully, you learn something from it. But I am in no way what I say the absolute right way to do things or absolutely be all end all, just some critiques to take a look at. So
it's always good to have somebody else his eyes looking at my photographs, because I never saw the little twig in the background, things like that. Now that you mention that, that's all I see.
yeah, I totally ruined the photo for you. And my
Yeah, I
apologies.
know it's garbage now. Thanks.
Far from that. So
I've got a question.
yeah.
Mike Rackover, you just critiqued the blue heron. Now, as a photographer, I basically kept the picture with the bird flying in the position that I took it in. But I'm trying to get a better explanation about left to right, right to left. Same thing with the horses on the beach.
Yeah, so there's a couple principles at play. One is most societies and within the world, we read and digest information from left to right. And so our eyes have been trained and our minds have been trained to see information from that perspective. The theory that I have is that when we're accessing the past, we're thinking we look to the left and access the left hemisphere of our brain. When we're envisioning or thinking about the future, we tend to look up and to the right. So there's a little bit as well of how the brain sees things. So things that are coming from the past, that's where it was, to where it's going in the future. So it's not a be all end all, once again, rule, but I will encourage you to rotate some of your images and look at them from that perspective. And oftentimes you're going to find it's got a little bit better flow and reads just a little bit differently. Is what I found in my own images. I have images that I've taken an orientation almost within the field that has more of a right to left kind of flow, and it feels a little blockier. Well, when I rotate that image, now it has a little bit of a better flow within there. So just something to consider.
Thank you very much.
Well, Nick, I appreciated that too, because I know about, of course, a lot of times for the left to right flow, but just seeing the horses there on the beach and also that heron there, it really brought it to mind, exactly just seeing how it goes from left to right and how that improves things a little bit too. And I also thought it was really great where you have the odd numbers of things too, like the horses, 3 of them, 2 of them, you're right. It just wouldn't fit, but the 3 of them were perfect. Now you can't always get that.
No,
But it certainly did look really, really good that way. And just some of the other things, as you were saying, about how you look for what your subject is and make that really pop so that everything else kind of is in the background and is just kind of building to that. Everything is coming to that. So as soon as you look at it, there's no doubt in your mind. It pops right out at you. That's your center point.
Yeah, and that's the thing is trying to identify what the subject is and where the viewer is going to be looking, and then working with the supporting compositional structures or colors or light or textures to help guide it. And it's not about, we shouldn't be able to obviously tell in terms of manipulation where you're telling the viewer to look. That's never the goal of post-processing. The goal is to subtly influence, and so selectively lightening or darkening just ever so slightly to help guide the eye or the brain a little bit helps a tremendous amount. And I'm not an advocate. I don't even know how to do, fancy things within Photoshop of replacements and, adding things in, et cetera. It's all just about, if I'm doing my job right, you shouldn't be able to tell what I'm doing in my post-processing. And I'm not always doing my job right, but sometimes I am.
Yeah, very good points. Thank you.
Yeah. And then the other thing I'll say, I was going to say on rule of odds, I do an exercise in my composition class where I have these 5 sandstone structures in Utah, and then I crop into 4, and then I crop into 3, and then I crop into 2. And when you start to look at it, you start to see what's going on. What happens when we're looking at 2s or 4s is our brain and our mind can very easily compare the left to the right and say, well, that one's different, and move on. When you're in 3s or 5s, you're not able to group things together. And as such, our brain has to look at things individually. Well, the first one's different from the third one. What about the second one? Well, the second one's different from the first one. And then you find yourself kind of going back and forth. And that's the ultimate goal. We want people to be engaged with our images and engaged with them and thinking about what's going on, not just quickly looking and glancing, oh, pretty picture, and moving on. And so that's one of the principles I teach. And speaking of teach, and I want to put a big plug in, I have nature photography classes. I'll put it in the chat. It's a class where I teach. I have about 16 different courses, 45 different classes on there. And you can use the code TRY10 to get $10 off any class that's on there. And then also adding to the newsletter, I'm going to have a speaker series this fall. It's going to be Mark Adamus, Guy Tall, Josh Cripps, Eric Bennett, Alistair Ben, Sarah Marino. They're all coming on to speak through this platform as well in the spring and the fall. So love for you to plug in and check things out. And then I'll put one more thing in there. And then any other questions? I'm teaching my resuming infield workshops here in the fall. I'm teaching one here in November on the Central Coast. So if you're interested in coming out to California for a couple of days, I only have 2 spots left. I just announced it yesterday. It's filled. 5 of the 7 spots are filled. So if you're wanting to come out to California, I'd love to welcome you out, but it doesn't have to be now either.
Nick, can you send me the speaker series info, and I'll put that in the newsletter?
Yeah, it's not fully announced, but I will send it to you when I get there, Vince, for sure.
When you get there.
Yeah, I appreciate that much.
Sure. Could I ask you to expound a little bit further on your white balance process where you did zoomed up your vibrance and saturation? I wasn't quite understanding how that affected your decisions on white balance.
Yeah, so let's look at, let me just find a raw image, basically. So let me reshare. All right, so here's a raw image within Lightroom. This is a place many of us probably recognize, Two Goose, or what is it called? Wild Goose Island in Glacier National Park. So what we're going for, and this one actually has some post-processing. Look at all those dust spots I haven't cleaned up. All right, good. Makes you feel better. We all get those all the way through. So, so within this image, and I'll just go into the develop and I'll reset it back to no adjustments whatsoever. So this is kind of my base raw lifeless image within there. Now what I'm going for, and I might just want to increase my exposure a little bit and even just adjust my highlights, is I want my highlights, the areas that are getting direct sun, to feel warm, and those areas that are in the shadows to feel cool. Areas that aren't getting that direct sun should feel more blue, more green, more purple. Areas that are getting direct sun should feel more red and more orange. And what I'm looking for is I don't want that color to bleed from my highlights down into my shadows. I don't want bright shadows. I want shadows that feel much, much more natural. But as we do white balance, we can go through and try different things. It's oftentimes really difficult for us to discern between these different white balance settings. Am I correctly doing what I want? Am I keeping warmth where I'm getting bright, or am I getting shadow kind of crepe or whatever else? And so the first thing I do is I have my profile I like to use, which is Adobe Standard. Many people use color or landscape. It's a personal preference. Landscape has a little bit more blues. Standard just works well for me. And then I'll go into, oftentimes just my as shot white balance is a good starting point. But now when I look at this image, I can't tell completely if I have my white balance set the way I want. So I'll take my vibrance and my saturation up to that 100. And now you can see it's been nuclearized, but areas that are in the shadows, like, so say I warm up, I don't want something like this because now it feels very, very cast. And there's a lot of that warmth going into my shadows. And if I'm very cool, well, I'm losing that brightness in areas I'm getting that light. So when you set white balance correctly, that in turn sets the accuracy of your colors going forward and enables you to get better color separation. And so I'm watching as I'm going back and forth, and watch my clouds in particular. So when I'm really warm, well, I'm not getting cloud separation. When I start to cool that off just a little bit, well, now you can see my cloud separation starts to come back. And that's what I'm going for. I want things to be able to feel separated as I post-process. Because if it's too cool, well, now I've cooled off and lost that things. If it's too warm, well, now I don't have cloud separation. It's going to feel very kind of muddled together. So I definitely want some cloud separation. So these are the kind of things I'll be looking at as I go through. And I can make other minor adjustments to my images at a later point in time. General rule of thumb on white balance, it's always better to start a little bit cool and warm your image up after you've post-processed than it is to try to cool an image down after you're done. So I find something like that, and then I just resume my vibrance and saturation back down to a 0. The next adjustment I do make as well for shooting raw is I take my blue primary saturation adjustment and I take the saturation up. So what this is doing, rather than universally just add blue saturation, this is increasing the blue pixels there or that are present within my RGB of what my camera's captured. And I can tell you on majority of my landscape images, this adds a nice pop, and this is where I add my saturation. I don't add saturation with the saturation adjustment because that's going to be uniformly taking my saturation up most of the time in ways I don't want. And so those are just some subtle ways. But
And do you leave that blue at 100%?
I do, yeah. And if I get to the end and I find I have too much saturation, I can back it back down, but usually I can leave it at 100%. And you can see here's the before and here's the after. It's not a big adjustment, but I'm getting just a little bit more blues out of those particular areas and a little bit more color saturation, separation. That's what I'm always going for, is how can I get my colors to separate within there? Not to have them be brighter, but to have them separate so you can start to see things distinctly as I post-process.
Why did that blue adjustment not turn the whole image
Yeah.
out of whack?
So if we go to our HSL, for example, and we take our blues up, then we're taking the image kind of out of whack pretty quickly.
Yeah.
All the RGB calibration is doing, this isn't using the inherent RGB capture that your camera is doing within the field and increasing only the pixels that are present within how your camera is capturing the scene. And so it's not adding adjacent pixels. It's just what blue pixels your camera captured within the scene. It's just giving those blue pixels a little bit more saturation. So that's about as good of an explanation as I've been able to come up, and I've been trying to explain this for a while. All I can tell you is it's not you when you just increase your HSL, you're increasing all of your saturation pixels, or you're adding additional saturation. All this is doing is targeting the blue pixels that are there within your image and adding into those.
Nick, are you targeting the blue basically because you're taking this landscape that you're trying to bring out the water detail, the sky detail?
No, I'm taking blue because it just seems to be the best kind of baseline saturation color to be increasing within the images to give that element of mid-tone depth I'm going for.
Okay.
And so where my images go, and so if we look at the blue, watch the histogram up here as I increase the saturation, it's kind of subtly shifting, and it's not big,
Yeah.
subtly shifting. Watch is going from the into the right more and going from the left in. It's shifting some of these pixels more into the center of the midtones. And this is where we want a lot of our detail to try to get. So I'm going to always be trying to force some of the detail from my highlights and my shadows more into the center part as I'm post-processing. So as I'm adjusting things like a tone curve, for example, I'm going to be spreading out my histogram even more to kind of get more of that detail spread out within our images. So if we take it down, now we're pushing the darks, well, we're losing that detail, versus if I open up my darks a little bit and open up my shadows, well, now I'm bringing in more of that detail within the image, and it's going to make it feel a lot more life.
So Nick, are you saying that with most of your pictures that you do use the blue pixel? I was just thinking maybe it's only where you have water or sky.
Yeah, no, it's every single image I do except for desert landscapes or night photography. I'm adding that. I'm choosing to increase just those minor amounts of blue pixels within that image before I start. So then I don't add saturation. I'm just adding I'm trying to add mid-tone blues into my images.
Hmm. Very
Nick, I
interesting.
heard it said that the Lightroom calibration module that you did that blue adjustment, blue primary, was a global or is a global adjustment that not only increases the saturation, but increases the luminosity of the entire image. Is that, you think that that's true?
Yeah, I think so too. Because I always mess around with my luminance a little bit. So saturation is richness, luminance is brightness. And so if I want more rich color, I'm going to add saturation. If I want brighter colors, which we usually always do, I'm going to add luminance. So that's the reason I don't want more richer colors. I don't want things to feel inaccurate. I want them to feel bright and kind of cheery most of the time when I post process. So
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much.
absolutely. Yeah, I need to go wrangle up some dinner before I get a wife and a dog that stage a walkout. So
Okay, so thank
Yeah,
you.
that's right. There's
I'll look-
3 hours.
I'll look for the notations in my email to get
Yeah.
into the newsletter.
absolutely. Well, I appreciate the time. Hope to see
All right,
some of
Nick.
you through a class or a course in the future. And then otherwise, have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Nick.
Hey, time to.
We had a good
stop the
turnout
recording.
with images. I think there were 70, not our highest this year, but I think we hit 82 the last time, which was like a record. But I was really pleased that we had 6 new submissions or people submitting.
Thanks, Vince, for having him in. You can